Thanks a lot. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this session on compliance assurance and public participation. I've agreed with the speakers that we'll let them do their presentation, take a few questions just on clarification and just check that people have understood what's going on. And then at the end of the session, we'll have an open quick Q&A session with all the speakers. Before we start, can I just ask, is Arif in the room? That's the last speaker. Okay, that means we may have an extra 15 minutes at the end, but we'll see how we go. I'm going to try and keep it strictly to 15 minutes. The speakers know that. So the first presentation is the workshop report on the INSPIRE implementation in Lower Saxony. Peter Kreutzer is going to introduce that, and Marika Dietrich will then speak about it. So Peter, if you want to go up, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know how to get the presentation running here. Maybe.
I think Leah's coming to help you.
Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. I'm going to very briefly set the frame for the presentation of my colleague, Marika Dietrich. And this frame is concerning the INSPIRE implementation at regional level in Germany from the perspective of a public authority responsible for maintenance and delivery of geospatial reference data for Lower Saxony. So, very briefly, I hope this one is going to work. This is the content of our joint presentation, and I'm just covering the first bullet point, the situation in Germany. And as you can see from this map, Lower Saxony is situated in the northwest of Germany. Germany altogether has 16 federal states and a pretty dense population with more than 80 million persons. So, as you can imagine, spatial planning is something that is very critical for successful land use. And so, the data for this planning need to be in place. Responsibility for geospatial reference data, including the cadastral data, the large-scale mapping, is assigned to the 16 federal states in Germany and not to the federal government, which means that we have to somehow coordinate our organization and tasks. We have the so-called Working Committee of the Surveying Authorities of the States of the Federal Republic of Germany, and I'm not going to read out about the responsibilities, but as you can see, in those plenary sessions, we have representatives from all 16 states as well as of the federal government, of those ministries responsible for geospatial data at federal level. And so we set up a joint data model, the so-called AAA data model in Germany, that has been introduced in 2011, and it covers the real estate cadastral data as well as the geodetic reference frame and other geotopographical data sets. INSPIRE coordination is done as well. The aim is to provide interoperable services and, first of all, to identify INSPIRE-relevant standard ADV products. We're talking about product specifications, fees and licenses, and actually about changing our data model according to European requirements. This is the federal perspective. If we're coming to Lower Saxony, it's a little bit smaller, as you can see, roughly 50,000 square kilometers, and with altogether 37 administrative districts and 943 municipalities, which is rather important because we have one responsible agency, LGLN, that's where my colleague and I are coming from, and for delivery of geospatial reference data, and we also are responsible to coordinate the spatial data infrastructure of Lower Saxony. So, as you can see, there are a lot of influencing factors. GDI means, in German, spatial data infrastructure. And so we have INSPIRE, we have the federal states, we have Lower Saxon requirements, if it comes to IT standards, for instance. And we have, of course, the German spatial data infrastructure, which is important. Coming to that, it all started in 2005 with an administrative agreement in Germany, and a steering committee on a spatial data infrastructure was set up. In 2008, this administrative agreement had been changed and renewed, so INSPIRE requirements are now taken into account. And for Lower Saxony, you can see the same here. In 2010, we adopted a law that is now there for us in order to implement the INSPIRE requirements. The Lower Saxon spatial data infrastructure is working starting from the political level, from the government of Lower Saxony, the different departments. We have a steering committee as well, and we have also included the local government associations of Lower Saxony as well as the municipalities, and we have one coordinating office for our spatial data infrastructure, also implementing the INSPIRE requirements. This is where my colleague Mareike Dietrich comes from, and I'm not going to talk anymore. I will hand over to her now, and she will continue.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Well, good morning to you all. As Mr. Kreuzer pointed out, the surveying authorities are linked in many ways with other public authorities. So working together with the other 7 states of Germany who are making use of the same software solution called Extra Server for delivery of the AAA data via web service was quite obvious, especially as they are all using the AAA data model. So the AAA data model of the surveyors cover 12 INSPIRE themes, which were all identified by the ADV. I'm sure you are familiar with these little icons symbolizing the themes, for example, cadastral parcel or elevation. The first approach to get to the INSPIRE data model was by using the standard exchange format for the AAA called NAS. That's a GML file. And the way from the AAA model to the INSPIRE model is described by Hale alignments, which were derived and provided by the ADV. Well, now the idea is to get a direct delivery from our database of the INSPIRE viewing and download services. So therefore we need INSPIRE schema transformations, or even better, web service configurations for the extra server. To get to these web feature service configurations in the extra server, we will use Hale, and we needed 3 new tools within Hale. So the first is an import plugin for the already existing web feature service configuration for AAA. That will be transported into an Hale alignment, which describes the way from the database to the AAA model. If we merge that with the already existing Hale alignments from the ADV, from the AAA model to INSPIRE, we will get the result of an Hale alignment from the database to INSPIRE. That will be exported and can be used in the extra server. So that's the web feature configuration for INSPIRE. And we have to do this once for every one of the INSPIRE themes covered by the AAA model. Well, that's the way the surveyors are handling INSPIRE, and the surveying and mapping authorities of Lower Saxony are quite well positioned because they are a technically orientated administration anyway. The AAA data model is an excellent starting point because it is based on the same basics as the INSPIRE model. Our data is changing every day, so that's why we wanted a way to deliver INSPIRE data directly from our database. Working together with others has its advantages, but coordination tasks are quite time-consuming. So the INSPIRE deadlines are still a challenge, but will be met. As Mr. Kreuzer said, in Germany, every one of the federal states is responsible for implementing INSPIRE. There are various approaches, centralized or decentralized, and each one of the federal states have to meet the general requirements of INSPIRE. So for a decentralized approach as we have it in Germany, in Lower Saxony at the moment, every public authority has to meet these requirements. So with the need to provide conformant data and its services, the call for collaboration in Lower Saxony has been increasing. So therefore, at the moment, a shift from the decentralized to a centralized approach is ongoing. The intention is to provide other stakeholders with the surveying administration solution. That means we have to include other thematic data sets in our database, and we need schema transformations for these other data sets. So hopefully we can use the 3 new tools of HAIL to get to these web service configurations. The result should be a centralized data delivery platform based on the experience of the surveying authorities. It'll be a centralized approach using the same IT infrastructure, and the advantage would be that know-how how to handle INSPIRE has to be provided only once. This will be open for participation of other bodies of Lower Saxon state administration, and the idea is to open this up for local authorities as well. But legal questions have to be answered for that, and organizational obstacles have to be overcome, so it's not just a technical problem. Well, to draw a conclusion, the INSPIRE data in Lower Saxony will be provided on request with conversion to INSPIRE on the fly. There's a shift to a centralized service delivery ongoing at the moment, based on the solution of the surveyors, so the state survey has to provide a stronger technical support for the other INSPIRE stakeholders. Information on INSPIRE is spreading slowly, and that's why this shift is necessary now. And to draw a bottom line, the coordination office of the GDI-NI has to be expanded. Well, thank you for your attention.
Okay. Sorry, I just want to say that. Are there any questions for Marika, just to clarify anything she said, anything about this understanding, please?
Thank you for your presentation. You said the AAA data model is promoting interoperability between 16 lenders.
Yeah.
Does that also include the legal interoperability? Are the licenses also interoperable with each other?
No.
Is that one of the legal questions that still
Yeah.
have to be answered?
Well, yes, on a different level. What I meant was with the local authorities, but the problem is existent on other different levels as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, then thanks a lot, Marika. Our next presentation is from Stefan Zander, who's going to talk about the Municipal INSPIRE implementation in the German state of North Rhine-Westphalia.
Same problem. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. From my side, I'm representing the city of Wuppertal, an old industrial city in North Rhine-Westphalia, which is Germany's federal state with the most inhabitants, and not surprisingly, with the most large cities. And that's why the municipal contribution to implement and INSPIRE as a federal state is a bit more important than in other federal states in Germany. But to be honest, the cities in North Rhine-Westphalia are still at the very beginning of implementing INSPIRE, and they still have to tackle some basic tasks. Most important task is the identification of the INSPIRE data sources. And that means that you have to analyze the legal regulations, laws from very many different disciplines, because a city is only obliged to publish data if there's a legal regulation that demands the collection or the dissemination of the data. The second is you have to cope with the INSPIRE data schemes. There are a lot of technical guidance documents, and you don't have appropriate staff in the most cities in North Rhine-Westphalia to tackle these issues. Second difficult task is to determine who is to operate the INSPIRE services. You can do it as a city, you can do it in cooperation with other cities, or you can have a kind of agreement with a federal agency of North Rhine-Westphalia. And that means you have to do some tricky negotiations between the cities and the state of North Rhine-Westphalia. By the way, NRW is North Rhine-Westphalia. It's a common abbreviation in Germany. So to tackle these issues, it was necessary to form a working group, a joint working group that comprises the municipal top-level associations in North Rhine-Westphalia. There's 3 of them, one for the rural counties, one for the larger cities and one for the smaller cities, and players from the state NRW. And what's important is that this working group comprises not only geoinformation professionals, but also lawyers from the municipal top-level associations, because they are the right people to decide if there's a legal obligation to collect or disseminate the data. And the main output of this working group is a PDF document that calls itself Recommendation for Action to implement INSPIRE as a city. And this document is very frequently updated, very frequently for a document that is from a working group of so much players. That means half-yearly to yearly. And it gives some general recommendations in the text part and detailed assessments of all possibly INSPIRE-relevant data sources of NRW municipality in Annex 2, not Annex 2 of the INSPIRE directive, of this document. And it looks like this. I'm sure you can't read the tiny letters, but I want to give you a look at the structure of our recommendation in detail. We have rows. Every data set is covered in one row of this table that builds Annex 2 of our document. And we have 2 rows that cover the analysis of the legal regulations. And if it's stated yes in the first row, then there is a legal obligation to collect the data. And what's more, we have a row that covers the analysis of the INSPIRE data schemes. There you find the data, the application scheme, and the class that has the semantics that fits to the data that you're obliged to collect. And to tackle the second issue, who should operate the INSPIRE services? The municipalities for themselves or a federal agency? We found it helpful to type the basic condition from A to D. Type A is the case when the state, NRW, already operates INSPIRE compliance services, like in Lower Saxony. And if there are stable regulations for updating the data. Type B is a kind of pre-version of A. The state has committed to operate the services, but the implementation has flaws. It's not yet INSPIRE compliant. Type C is the most important one. It's the case where the state has not committed to operate INSPIRE services so far, but the data is available in a uniform structure all over the country. So the provision of INSPIRE services by the state would be really sensible and would be common sense, in fact. Type D is the most problematic type for a city in NRW. The state has not committed to operate the INSPIRE services so far, but the data is not available in a uniform structure all over NRW, and that's why the provision of INSPIRE services by the state is not achievable, or maybe not likely. And this categorization, the typing of this basic condition, who's to run the services, is covered in this row type. This example is one of the C type. So, who does what in NRW? It's a kind of clarification process that is driven with the help of our recommendation paper. If for a certain data source, the type is A, the state does everything and the tasks for our working group are none. If the data source has type B, it's the task of our working group to observe the implementation process on the state level and discuss flaws in the implementation with the federal agency that's responsible. If you find type C, you have to continue the negotiations between our working group and the state NRW. This, I didn't mention it earlier, IMA, GDE, NRW. This is an interministerial committee that tries to do the same as we do in our working group on the state level. Every ministry takes part in this committee. And if you find type D, you have to initiate development of implementation aids for the cities in NRW. So you see the process character. Everything that's type C or B tends to be type A in a few years. So there's not really anything substantial to do for the cities. But what is D is likely to will be in the D in the future. So that's a part we have to care for as a city in Germany. So we have initiated this working group as a city, and at least we have a kind of moral obligation to follow our own recommendations. And there are a lot of tools ready to tackle the implementation task. We added the metadata and validate the metadata with a geocatalog of North Rhine-Westphalia that's free for all. We instantiate download server on our own. This is a kind of dedicated download server where we put all files that have to be downloaded for open data and for INSPIRE. The download services, the download services are currently in the form of atom feeds available, hosted by a federal agency. What's to be done is a scheme transformations. And we will tackle this on our own with FME. It's a kind of commercial version of the Hail software used in Lower Saxony. And it looks like we will manage this for the simpler models, like, for example, land use. We have not the staff to tackle this for a complex model like cadastral parcels. But this is type A, so we didn't have to do it. Most data sources that stay in type D have rather simple models, so we are sure we will manage the scheme transformations on our own. What was surprising to us was that the only point that really made problems was the development of the view services. We run OGC compliant services for ages, so we didn't think we will face any problems with this, because it seems to be quite similar. But especially the configuration of the INSPIRE WMS layers made the problem that we have inadequate specifications in the technical guidance documents for the portrayal services. What do I mean with this? The first problem is you have in these specifications aggregated layers with undifferentiated styles. Multiple data sets have to be published on one layer and with the same default style. And the most impressive example is land use spatial plan for Wuppertal, though it's not ready yet. It's only a few data sets so far. It bears this image because it's not only land use plans. You have a lot of municipal statutes that fit to the semantics of a spatial plan in the land use theme. And what's more, the get feature info method is optional. There's nothing said in the technical guidance documents to the get feature info method, so we consider it as optional. So you don't have the chance for further examination of this image that is really not proper for visual interpretation. So what we did was to design a few conventions we introduced additional layers. Each data set that is part of this aggregated layers gets its own layer. And of course, you have to amend your own convention for names and titles of these layers. And we made the get feature info method mandatory. But a get feature method for a layer that aggregates different data sets has to support results with more than one feature, and it has to support different feature types. And what you get is, if you use the Wuppertal INSPIRE view service, the green layers that are directly specified in the portrayal chapters of the technical guidance documents, and the additional layers that deal with exactly one data set. That is also part of this aggregated layer. And you get a feature info request that covers with one request different feature types, like in this case the protected sites, point objects and area objects that are part of this this layer. So that's what we did. We so far it's only a Wuppertal convention, but we are on a way to put it in the recommendation for action for all the cities in North Rhine-Westphalia. And we hope that the view services of North Rhine-Westphalian players will be quite similarly structured in the future. So that's my last point. Thank you. By the way, Wuppertal is famous for this means of transport, a kind of monorail over our central rivers of Wuppertal. So that's why it's on the last slide.
Okay,
thank you, John.
Thank you, Stefan. Does anybody have any questions? Is there anything you need Stefan to clarify before you're done? Please, Glenn.
Thank you for the presentation. I think it gives a very good overview of the particular challenges at lower administrative levels of implementing INSPIRE. But I was wondering, as a city, do you also see, or are you convinced there will be any benefits, especially for tackling cross-border issues of implementing INSPIRE, or do you rather see it as a legal obligation? Because now maybe more wrongly, I have the second feeling that it's a legal obligation is there, but
that's an important issue. And I was thinking about this question for a long time. But we don't have any direct benefit, especially as Wuppertal is not at the border of North Rhine-Westphalia. So we don't have cross-border issues with the Netherlands, for example. But to my mind, the negotiation process between the municipal level and the federal state is really has benefits for everyone in the geodata community, because it's a systematic approach. You just clarify who plays which role, who cares for what aspect, and it's a really important contribution to quality of spatial data coming from the public sector. That's so I really was no friend of INSPIRE in the beginning, but now I think it's a really it has huge benefits for the for all the geodata community in a federal state.
Thanks, Stephen. Sorry, there's just one question for me, if you don't mind. I was just going to ask, what sort of support have you had from the federal level?
The federal level gives us a lot of really good working tools. Okay. Yeah, that's the metadata catalog is really help, and they care for a lot of technical issues. So it's not possible to implement INSPIRE on a municipal level without the technical support from federal agencies in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Stefan? Or is it okay? Please.
Are you finding any practical solutions to working with multi-theme data sets? Are you finding problems, and what sort of extra resources do you need for working with multi-theme data sets, especially for both compliance and then delivering the services?
The multi-theme data sets, as you called them, made some problems in configuring our OGC service suite. We use Degree, it's an open source suite, so we had to spend some money, especially to get the style parameter over cascading accesses. But if you have a multitude of themes in one layer, it only is helpful if you have the get feature info method. And that's really nice. You just click in one spot and you get a list of, see my example, every single statute that's relevant at this very place. So if you don't support the get feature info method, this is not really useful. But if you support it, it has really a significant use case. Just have a kind of thematic, an overlapping request. And then you use the different the response to check layers that cover one data set. So I hope I get your question right.
Any other questions? Okay, then thanks, Stefan. Our next presentation is from Torben Hansen from the Danish Agency for Data Supply and Efficiency.
Just go to
and Torben is going to talk about building a national spatial data infrastructure, which ought to be interesting to everybody in the room.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Torben Hansen and come from this organization, Danish Agency for Data Supply and Efficiency. I'll talk a little more about what that is later on. Denmark, I saw from the slides, we are, when we exclude Greenland and Faroe Islands, we are slightly smaller than Lower Saxony. So that's the size of Denmark. I have taken the approach that I'll talk mainly about national SDI and with INSPIRE as part of the national SDI. So it's really the national SDI that is the main topic of this presentation. What happens here? Okay. Really, what is spatial data infrastructure? You have seen a lot of written definitions of that. I've put it into a picture because this is basically what it's all about. You have data from many sources that can be used in many domains, and you have arrangements so that all the data are being maintained and quality assured, and you make it available in a way that you can use it all together. So basically that's what a spatial data infrastructure is. What are the drivers for a spatial data infrastructure? Well, there are technology drivers and business drivers. Technology drivers allows us to build a spatial data infrastructure. And here we talk about the service-oriented architecture with heterogeneous IT environment consisting of loosely coupled systems as a very important driver around the internet, and then the standards that allow that. But it's nice you have the technology to do it, but you also need a reason to do it, so that's why you need the business drivers. And I'll say that on the civil side, we have called it e-government. I've learned that it's now called digital government. We have INSPIRE as a driver on the civil side, and then we are also doing the stuff for the military, and on the military side you have the network-based operation, so you actually also have a driver on the military side. Pretty simple concept with the multiple sources and used in many domains. What does it take? You need to work in different areas to actually make this come through. And there are different ways of looking at what do you need to work with. I find this pretty useful. It's taken from Vanessa Lawrence, former CEO of Ordnance Survey in UK, and it basically talks about you need to talk about organization, standards, data, technology, and people. So let's take a look at that. First, the organization, things like governance, policies, licensing, funding and pricing, partnerships, and so on. When we take a look at our organization, we have this name now, but really what I'm talking about is the Danish National Mapping and Cadastral Agency. We have done a pretty good job in confusing everybody about what we are called. We were formed in '89 as the National Survey and Cadastre, and that was the name we kept until 2013. And then we were renamed to the Danish Geodata Agency, and then for some other reasons we were split into two a couple of years ago. So one is maintained the name Danish Geodata Agency, and the other one is called Agency for Data Supply and Efficiency, and that's where I come from. We are, as most European NMCAs, under a cost recovery regime. We need to recover a lot of the costs that we have. And as you can see from this line here, we have, this is actually talking about what is cost recovery we do from the point of use. And as you can see, up till we have free and open data now at the point of use, have had that since 2013. And as you can see, up till then, we had a cost recovery of approximately 30% at the point of use during that time until 2013. But really, there are some significant milestones on our way to free and open data. As you can see, in the first block is talking about that we had products, maps and geodata sold to government bodies, private companies and consumers up till 2001. Everything went digital in that period, and we ended up with an awful lot of products that we were pushing on the users and other organizations. Pretty costly, so we were basically bankrupt in 2001 with all this stuff that we had to do and maintain. So what did we do? We basically had to reinvent ourselves. We sacked 1/3 of the people in the organization, and we stopped any analog products. We didn't print anymore. Everything was digital. If anybody needed printed things, the private market would take care of that. So we went into digital, and then we also excluded consumers as part of who we were addressing. We were only addressing government bodies and private companies, and we defined ourselves as a spatial data infrastructure agency. So to do that, we also created what we call the digital map supply. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we also made some coordination bodies that are governance bodies in order to help foster better coordination and to build trust in how do we work together on this spatial data infrastructure. We did, as you can see, we in the beginning, we were still selling to other government bodies and private companies. In 2008, we had come to a point where we actually had built the trust and relationship so that we cooperated from that point on with the municipalities on the cadastral mapping. Earlier, there were two sets of mapping, technical mapping and topographical mapping. That was merged into one. And also we managed to get, instead of selling individually, a mandatory government subscription so that all government could use everything. And then we spent the next couple of years working with what was the start of the basic data program. I'll talk more about that. And as that, we actually came to a point where we got away with the mandatory subscription. States budget found those money, or they took them away from those that were paying them already, and then they put a little on top that would cover the loss of income from private companies, and then we made the free and open data from that point. If we look at the timeline, see what happens internationally during that timeline. Well, the famous U.S. executive order from Bill Clinton came out in '94. That was basically the beginning of SDIs. In 2001, UN Environmental Protection Agency made a contract with a small startup company called Keyhole Technology. That was the same year as we started our digital map supply, where we provided all our stuff via web services. In 2004, Google bought keyhole technology, and then in 2005, Google Earth and Google Maps came out. So this is the timeline. And then in 2007, the INSPIRE directive. So this is the timeline we're working with. Okay, as I said, we needed to redefine ourselves, and as part of this redefinition, we came to actually including yet another player. We were used to providing everything to the end user. We let in the application providers, private companies, as a player. So they should actually embed the spatial data infrastructure in whatever solution is being made out there. And the fundamental was that we provided shared resource embedding that can be embedded in multiple solutions and opens access on equal terms. This is just to say that high-level involvement in the governance side is very important. We had the service community until 2010. Then it was replaced by what we call the SDI Coordination Council that was based on the law implementing INSPIRE. And then for the basic data program, we have yet another governance organization or government body that is being used. The free and open data, the basic data program was based on a business case that actually showed pretty good payback. I'm not going to cover that. If you're interested in that, there is a presentation this afternoon, 2 o'clock, that will cover that business case and also the follow-up study that actually shows that the business case holds through. Okay. Enough about the organization, standards. Well, this was a picture I used about what is the SDI about. Many sources used in many domains. INSPIRE talks about easy to combine, and that's when we talk about interoperability. We use the so-called publish, find, bind paradigm where those with the sources publish what they have, and then the users can find it and bind to it if it's of relevance. Pretty simple concepts, but when you start thinking about it, what does it take? An awful lot of things need to be in place in order for this to work without repetitive manual interaction, as it's set in the INSPIRE directive. And really, this is where you need the standards. No standards, no interoperability. That's simple. We have the international standards, and obviously we have the geo standards that are key, but also in order to actually implement this, we need to be aware and agree on all the other ICT standards that are being used. Not only the standards, we also need guidelines. As I said, we have a number of drivers, and they each have their own requirements on this framework for data sharing. Really, I don't like when we call INSPIRE a spatial data infrastructure. It's really a framework for data sharing, and it's a framework that lives side by side with other frameworks for data sharing. And we have the e-government framework. This is the guidelines we have for e-government. Then we have the INSPIRE application schemas. Then for the military, we have the standards and application schemas coming out of DigiWig with the NGIF application schemas. So we have multiple drivers, and we need to support multiple frameworks of sharing in that spatial data infrastructure. Okay, data. We have an awful lot of, or we have a lot of those, especially Annex 1 data that is required by INSPIRE. I mentioned here what we have: parcels, administrative units, addresses, place names, topographic with buildings, roads, railways, and water courses, and elevation models, and so on. So this is what we provide into that spatial data infrastructure. But really, we are seeing this not just as a spatial data infrastructure. We are seeing this as part of a data infrastructure. because digital government is our main driver. And you need to make sure that it's not only spatial, that we also handle other entities such as individuals, businesses, and then it comes together with all real property and addresses and so on. So you really need to handle all those entities, and you need to model all those entities, and you need to model the relationships between all those entities. Okay, technology. We use an awful lot of different technology. You name it, we probably have it somewhere in the SDI. And we use both open source and closed source. That's not important. What's important is the cost of ownership. We have a reference architecture that we see as everybody should fit into. We are working together around the internet. We have components for maintenance of data. People responsible for maintenance of data pick whatever is relevant for their use, best of breed in their business. And then what is done is that when they maintain data, they need to replicate it into the information components, where we basically then obey the application schemas that should be available for each of the different data sharing frameworks. And then, obviously, we also publish it so that we have the metadata and so on. And in this environment, you have both the maintenance application and those who are purely using stuff. Okay. Then, last but not least, people. Because this is something that we need to work with a lot of different stakeholders in order to make work. We end up with all these sources, and how do we use it? It could resemble something like this. And how do we then make this stuff work? Again, from many sources and used in many domains. We started out putting quite a lot of effort in how do we actually work with these people that should embed the content of the data infrastructure into the solutions. And as this is how many hits we have. You can see it has been steadily growing ever since we started in 2001. We have more than 3 billion hits last year, so it's really an exponential growth over time, and so it is being used. We have, as I said, worked a lot with these application providers, and worked with the business model. But this is not only a question of saying that we have something that they can use, it's also a question of working with them. We had the application provider program where we, as one of the components, had a yearly seminar where we did both hands-on and talked about the development. And you can see this is the development in the first 10 years. Started out with a pretty small group and ended up with quite a lot of companies. This was mainly from the private sector, from companies providing solutions to the users. So I would claim that we have been pretty successful in getting it out. Then the other question is, how do we actually make sure that you have all the different sources that are needed here? And that's another story. I would say that some data providers are able to handle getting their stuff out with using all these standards that are necessary. But I also have to admit that most don't. It is pretty complex stuff, and the organization lack critical mass to actually do this. So this is one of the areas we are working in right now. How can we help those owners of data sources to come out with good and useful services? So basically, that was my tour de force through the Danish SDI. I hope it was not too fast. There's a lot of things to cover. So.
Thanks, Torben. Just before I move on, can I ask, is Arif in the room? Okay, so that means we're not going to have the last presentation today, I think, which means that I can ask a question that might take a little bit longer explanation. You had a slide up about the governance groups. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the relationship between those groups is. It was the slide before the one trailing Ulla's presentation later today.
I think we are getting there. This one, right?
Yeah.
What happens? This one, yes. Yes, I didn't put too many words to it. I can do that. As I said, we started out when we basically redefined ourselves, and that was in coordination with the e-government body in Denmark. The e-government initiatives is being run out of Ministry of Finance, and under their umbrella, we created this geodata service community that worked from 2001 to 2010.
So the current setup, so that you've got the Coordination Council and the Basic Data Board. How do they relate to each other?
That's a good question.
Okay.
As you can see, the SDI Coordination Council that was created as a result also, or as part of the implementation of the law, it is about spatial data. And as you can see in the last line there, the members are from both government, state and local government, university and private businesses. And it is working on the spatial part of the data infrastructure. Whereas when you get to the basic data program, there is a board there in charge of implementing that. And that is much more than just spatial. It's also the persons and the enterprises and the real estate thing. And by the way, you will, if you haven't seen the level of detail we have in the registrations in I think that goes for most of the Nordic countries. You probably won't believe it, but we do have massive informations in our registers about all these things. And that is being kept separate, and that is a potential. Well, you definitely need to be aware. How do we make these things fit together so they are not going in each direction?
Okay. All right, thanks very much. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about that later. Any other questions of clarification for Torben at this point?
Actually, my question was quite the same.
Yes, our managing director is heading up the SDI Coordination Council, and he's also a member of the Basic Data Board. Yes.
Thanks. Any other questions for Torben? Okay. Thanks, Torben. Our next presentation, and the last presentation today. In the programme, it says it's going to be presented by Glenn, but we have a surprise for you. It's in fact going to be presented by his colleague Katrina Valichkaita. Okay.
It doesn't work. I just tried. I have to do this apparently. That should work. And this one.
Computer. Hello, everybody. I'm Katrina Valichkaita, just like presented just now. I'm the student of Glenn. And as a very good student, of course, I completely messed up his presentation. I even changed the presentation name. So today, we're actually going to talk about OpenSDIs, but we're going to talk about it from the perspective of the simple, non-expert user. We're going to look for the gap between you, the experts, and me, the student. So the actual work, even though we have the grouping here with Glenn, Bastian, and Frederica sitting there for your questions, the actual work was done by the students, the geomatic students of TU Delft. You can see all of them in here. So I'm not alone, I'm representing them. So the topic of today is OpenSDI. To keep you hooked, there's the map, which you're going to see in the end. Please follow, and you're going to see how your country is doing. The context. As I said before, we are TU Delft students, Master of Geomatics. This is part of the course, 5 ECTS course, so very limited, of Geoinformation Organization and Legislation, given by Bastian van Loenen. And we were supposed to develop a framework and apply it to each of European Union countries, and then suggest a plan to arrive to the next level of OpenSDI. So we were supposed to write a paper, evaluate, collect the data. It was actually very interesting. So the user profile, simple student, well, I have no money. I have no idea what INSPIRE is or even a geoportal is. I just want to download the data, put it somewhere, on a wall. And I only speak English. So, from my perspective, what is OpenSDI? You have 4 basic ways to look at it. You have 4 perspectives. The first component, or the perspective, is open spatial data. You needed to be able to make the OpenSDI. In this case, we're looking at the Sebastopol meeting definition, but we're also going further and we're saying it has to be free. We're students, we don't have money. Also, you can look from the open infrastructure development, where you're saying, okay, we need to participate in the governance, we need to be able to publish the data, and we need to access it. So that also refers to geoportals. Third perspective, slightly wider, is the open government definition, where the open government strives to be transparent, it wants to collaborate, and wants to have people participating and participate itself. That goes to the fourth one, which is the open spatial ecosystem, where all 3 agents, so the government, the business, and the users, simple citizen users, have to be able to participate in each other's infrastructures and have to be able to share and contribute to each of them. So, simplified, an OpenSDI is an SDI where the governmental and non-governmental actors commonly govern and freely share open data. So, we didn't work completely from the air. We did look at other assessment frameworks. For the last 20 years, you were having a lot of beautiful assessment frameworks regarding the SDI. But SDI is not open SDI. It also has open data. In the last 5 years, you had many assessment frameworks like Global Open Data Index, Open Data Barometer. We actually analyzed them, and we came up with 3 most relevant perspectives. So the readiness, which refers most of the time about the standards, about the policies, about accessibility, the data, what data is published, is it actually findable, and the impact, so the research and use cases. So what does that mean in our framework? Now I'm going to quickly run through all of these perspectives with the key indicators. So the readiness. In our case, we were looking at the vision, we were looking at the participation of non-government actors in SDI decision-making. We were also looking at open data policy and non-government data included in the SDI. You have to remember we only speak English, and we couldn't validate our own country. So in many, many cases, we had to use Google Translate, so it could have been misunderstood. Second part, data, is about the availability and accessibility of spatial data to non-government actors. We focus on 2 main data sets, of course, limited time, which is topographic data, 1 to 10,000, and the address data, which is an INSPIRE data set. We were looking whether we can find it on Google, because of course, we don't know what a geoportal is, whether it was available on the 2 most important ones, whether it was available in English and not only in the national language, whether it was public, whether you can easily access it, whether you can go for it for free, and what is the interoperability. So we were looking at the data models and the standards. As last, we looked at the use of spatial data by non-governmental actors and associated benefits. This is actually the hardest part, because in many cases, it's very hard to evaluate it. So we had only 2 indicators. which were the use cases and the study showing the benefits of open spatial data. So, results. Exciting part, right? Okay. So the indicators that I just mentioned were summed together. They were all equally spaced, and the total score was supposed to be 3, because you have 1, 1, 1. So the best scores should have been 3, but actually nobody reached it. So the top 5 countries is actually the Netherlands, United Kingdom, Finland, Denmark, and Belgium. Belgium a bit unexpected, but you know. Regarding the readiness result, the top scorer was Spain, the Netherlands too. We were able to find a lot of the information also due to our professors because they had this. While for the implementation result or the data result, the top scorer was actually not one of the very old and well-developed countries. It was actually Estonia. I guess unexpected, but actually their development was very nice because we could very easily find it on Google. We can easily access and find their metadata. We can understand it because it was also in English. They're very open regarding the data. And of course, some of the countries were punished, for example, Germany, because actually, unfortunately, we were looking for the major data set for the whole of the country. We cannot look for all of the small ones. Regarding the impact, of course, as we would expect, many countries were scoring as a top scorer. United Kingdom, for instance, is very known for their amazing publications about use cases and also publicizing, oh, we're doing this in open data, and you know, it's like, look at that, the business doing this. They have to sell it. But also this was very well done in the Netherlands, was also very well done in Denmark and Finland. So, good for you. The other ones, please improve. This is an overview, so if you're interested in your own country, these are all 3 indicators summed up. This is work in development, so if you don't agree, just come to us and try to improve it. And of course, we try to see if there's a correlation, if there is a difference between open data and open spatial data, so our framework. Regarding open data, we looked at 3 assessment frameworks, which is the Open Data Barometer, Open Data Index, and European Data Portal Maturity Framework. As you can see, the expected scores, of course, United Kingdom scoring the best. But when we compare to our top scorers, so the Netherlands, Finland, United Kingdom, Denmark, and Belgium, we can see that not necessarily the top scorers get the top score from us. The Netherlands, for instance, scoring half of the score in the open data, so the traditional frameworks, was actually performing really well in open spatial data. So, in essence, there might be a correlation with the top scorers, but even with the lowest scorers, with the maximum and the minimum results. But however, in the middle, you see a lot of discrepancies. So we need to look where this cause comes from. So, the conclusion. Mind the gap. I'm the international non-spatial data user. For me, the data is really hard to find. I have the language barrier. It's not in the first Google results. There is not common dataset naming. So actually the biggest issue was to say, hey, how do you call a topographic dataset? Well, it's going to be abbreviation 25, abbreviation 10. It's not called topographic data. Also, it's very hard because you have multiple access points. You have to go through multiple websites to actually find it. It's hard to understand. Again, language barrier. What do the attributes mean? Also, the geoportal search gives completely irrelevant results. I get the coastal lines instead of actually the topographic data again. It's also very hard to use. I have many data sets because, of course, as in Germany's case, you don't have it combined. And unfortunately, the national licenses are hard to understand and hard to use because, well, Creative Commons is not that common yet. So, all in all, there are 3 gaps that we could identify. There is a difference between an expert and non-expert users because you expect that you can find it very easily, but actually you can't. Also, there is a difference between an SDI and open SDI. But also there is a gap between open data and open spatial data, which we just showed to you. So even though if you are very well in open data, it's not necessarily going to be the front runner of open spatial data. These are the resources. And if you have any questions, if you have improvements or you want to develop this framework with us, with your students, please talk to Glenn.
Thanks, Katrina. Thanks, really interesting. I don't have a question for you, but just one observation. Really interesting that you've identified expert and non-expert users, and I know the INSPIRE MIG-P group is moving towards starting to look at user needs. So I think that's quite an interesting start for them. Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Katrina?
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Just a remark, Cyprus was shown in one of the diagrams, however, it's not shown in the maps. Is there any reason?
Cyprus?
Yes.
Actually, this should be in the
In the diagram, yes, but in the map I didn't see it.
Maybe it's small?
Too small, but very important.
Yeah, I mean, Luxembourg is also there. But okay, thank you for the remark. I'm going to try to make it bigger. Okay, thank you.
So just a final call. Is Arif in the room? No, sorry, it doesn't look like we're going to have another presentation. I have a question just going back to the first presentation from Peter and Marika. Sorry, should have asked this at the point. You said that there were increasing calls for more collaboration. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about who's calling for that and what are they using the data for? So again, just sort of like user needs.
Well, actually, I'm going to take the mic. This is just because the municipalities and the local authorities, we followed a very decentralized approach from the outset. But as Marika showed, we realized that the municipalities need strong support, and this is an observation that was made by Denmark as well. So we realized that we have to change a little bit our approach and to give more support to the municipalities in order to enable them to supply their data sets. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Well, it looks like we're going to finish early. Does anybody have any other questions for any of our speakers today, or any comments or points that they would like to raise? I mean, we basically have 15 minutes for each slot, so if somebody wants to get up on the stage and just improvise for 15 minutes.
I have a question, especially for the people from Germany and maybe also from Denmark, linked to our presentation. So we said you see an influence on one hand on SDI legislation, but also need to share your spatial data, especially among government. But we also now said, open data is relevant. Can you briefly explain how you are dealing with those two worlds, how you are trying to combine them, or whether you just ignore one of them or the other one? Can you say a few words about that? Also,
Germany is a good experimentation field for Europe because we have this federal states with quite different approaches to open data. In Germany, there are a few city-states like Berlin and Hamburg started with open data laws, and the geodata falls completely under the open data paradigm. And North Rhine-Westphalia started with an open data approach this year. So from now on, the North Rhine-Westphalian geodata, the base cadastral map, is free. So are the addresses. But in our neighbor country, it's still has licenses which with costs. So it's quite difficult for your investigation to cover Germany or to assess Germany correct, because it's no longer homogeneous with respect to licenses. But I think...
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, the situation in Germany is pretty heterogeneous. I told you that we have 16 states, but we have a federal government as well. And the data coming from federal government are pretty open at the moment. If it comes to Lower Saxony, where I am from, we do not have any open data initiative. Right at the moment, I do not know how this will evolve over the next couple of years. But I have to say, at the moment, the situation is that we are due to recover costs. So, you see the statistics of our colleague. At the moment, I can only say we don't have it, but North Rhine-Westphalia has made a step forward in that direction, as well as, let me think about it, I think 5 other states in Germany. And, well, you can imagine how this might develop in the future.
Okay, as you could tell from my presentation, we do have open data that, meaning they are freely available. I agree that we could do better in the English description of the things and so on. But really, I think that the big issue of getting the data out, yes, it needs to be open. I would claim that still you and your colleague students are pretty geo-savvy people. So I think that the biggest problem is to get it out and used by those that are not geo-savvy. That's not a question of being free or not, but it's a question of how are they presented to the outside world. And there our finding is that, well, the services we provide as the INSPIRE services, yes, the experts can use them. We need something that is better for the ICT mainstream developers. And that's where we are working on or have been working and have not given up on actually making sure that they can be used from JavaScripting environments and so on as well. I'll be talking about that in the What If session on Friday.
Continuing on that, last Monday we had this workshop on same research, and there was someone saying, well, we should focus on the non-spatial user. And you have this application developer program. You also see development. I guess in the beginning it were only the well-known people in the geodomain that were attending the seminar. We also see development that there are now more non-spatial people, non-spatial developers in that program participating in Denmark.
Actually, it is a challenge to get out to the non-spatial people, and we are working on how to do that. I mean, the first thing is you need to offer a development environment that is known to them. So the JavaScript is something JavaScript like the Google API and also the Open Layers API. And actually what we have developed is something where we put in small functions that can be easily called from open layers so that it's easily integratable. I think what we need to do in order to make that successful is to make a credible environment around it, meaning you need to know that there is a community, open source community that will maintain those things. You need to have a well-defined or a well-known funding mechanisms for not only how to make them develop, but also how to maintain them and so on. So I think basically it's not a technical issue, it's an issue of how do you make the business model and the funding around that technology. The technology is there to get it out for non-geo-savvy people.
I have a question for Torben. Do the Danish people, do they really know the extent of what data is actually available? I work with Danish data, and I'm a spatial, I'd say, an expert. And I regularly connect virk.dk data, so detailed financial data, with detailed individual level data, like CVR data, to spatial locations. And actually the amount of detailed information we're able to display on the individual level is actually quite amazing. Are there any? What is the tone of discussion in Denmark on privacy and GIS ethics, and like what actually the private companies will be able to do with the amount of data that is actually open in Denmark when you start combining it? Any?
You're right. It's quite amazing the amount of data that is available. I will say we have not always done a good job in making it known for the outside world. I mean, a lot of people know what's there and they will find it. So our metadata, we are trying to improve that. But you're right. Open data. But one of the things that should be read into this open data policy is that open means that you don't have to pay a license, but open doesn't overrule what other rules exist on privacy and so on. It just means that you don't have to pay for it. So you don't have to pay for the person information, but you're still obliged to obey the laws about privacy and so on. I think that this will be something that will be much more in discussion in the coming years, because what you can do by combining things is quite amazing, and I think that this privacy issue will be an issue that will be much more talked about. It doesn't change the fundamentals. It is open, but you still have to obey all the other legislation.
Thank you. I would like to ask for the last presentation whether there is some plan to keep some continuity for the future, to have some time snapshots to see the maturation and also improvement of the methodology, because it is very interesting to see what you guys done. And also we have the currently heavy discussion on national level, particularly in Slovakia, in clarification of the borders and the scope between the, let's say, spatial, or I would put it from the different perspective, between the open data, INSPIRE, and e-government. And especially if we are now discussing about the way how to actually monitor the maturation of the infrastructures, we also have difficulties to create these justifiable borders, which things should be taken into the consideration when you are trying to do this kind of monitoring of particular domain, in this case of Open SDI. So just, are you having some plan for the future, or you will see? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the question. I think we definitely have plans to continue our work because we think it's interesting, but I think the first thing that should be done is making sure it's complete and correct, because it was students' work, so we know there are some missing values, not correct values, although most of them really did very nice, very valuable work, but I think if you really want to have it as a tool and make it open to the outside world, it should be correct. We should be careful about that. So our first, I think, the final slide or the final message of Katrina was, if you want to contribute as a practitioner or as a local expert, even if you're not involved directly in the implementation, but you say, yeah, I have a quite good view as a researcher, practitioner, or as a citizen, just let us know. I think it's important. We are very open to suggestions on how to improve, to begin the quality of our information, of our data we use. But also in addition, if you say, yeah, you now use a certain definition of OpenSDI, a quite limited set of indicators, but if you say, yeah, you forgot something that is more important, or you put too much focus on something else, also for that kind of input, we are very open. So, but if we can decide, we would really try to continue and keep it alive and improve it and see whatever is possible with that. So we're really open to input from everybody on this.
one thing to add, it actually really doesn't take long to do this. For me, it takes like 5 hours to do one country. I mean, for a student a day, so for a professional, it's probably an hour. So if you want to contribute, it's like, just write us an email.
I think especially that's why national experts, only with the language issues, national experts will be really helpful, because some students say they had to look at Cyprus or Finland or France or no matter what, just countries where very little information was available in English, so it really make it complex, although some of them did impressive work taking into account that consideration. But I think that's why we're really looking for national input, national experts who speak the language and who know much more about their national situation. Also for the UK, by the way.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. Any other questions? Sorry, just we're almost out of time, so I think this is probably the last question.
This will be very quick, if it's acceptable to ask a question of the chair. Open data, open geodata, UK trading funds, cost recovery. One of the problems with open data, the UK has been tremendous in opening up government data recently. DEFRA is tremendous, most of the other government departments, but when it gets to the topographic data, we still have this cost recovery issue. So I think one of the problems in looking at open data across all countries, and I'm talking globally as well, it's going right back to the government business models. If you do have cost recovery, as Lower Saxony, as OS, as a lot of other organizations do, because it's a government decision, that data is not going to be made fully open by any of the standard open data definitions. And it's not easy to say to a government, oh, by the way, we need for you to give another 120 million taxpayer pounds to a certain organization so you can make all your data open, when budgets are restricted absolutely everywhere. We're still recovering from 2008. So from your view, sitting in DEFRA in the UK, how's the open data scene working, especially for geospatial data? And I'm not talking topographic mapping data. I'm talking the geospatial data that DEFRA uses.
Well, from a departmental point of view, we have we started a data program 2 years ago now, which is going to run for another 3. And the idea is that our department is going to become a data-driven department. Any data that we acquire, the presumption is that it will be made open, and we want to base our policies on good quality data. So departmentally, I would say DEFRA at the moment is probably leading, the leading department in the UK, and other departments are looking at us. I think that's probably enough to say for now. There are other things going on in the UK. There's conversations with Ordnance Survey, with our land registry, with our local government and communities department about what the lead department maybe ought to be, and how land data and everything associated with it ought to be managed. So that's a developing discussion. I don't know too much about it at the moment, but something may emerge in the next month or so. I'm keeping my eyes open. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I think that's it. Just to sort of sum up a little bit, or just a sort of couple of points. I think what I've heard today was there's this. What seems to be emerging is there's an understanding that user needs need to be addressed and understood a bit more, but also it's so important that there's national support for what's going on across regions and for people. And that's basically it. Before we finish, I would just like to say thank you very much to Leah, who's been managing the room this morning. You've done a great job. Thank you. And thanks to everybody for coming. Enjoy the coffee break. And see you around. Hi. Oh, you are going to sign. You are going to sign. You've decided. You're okay with it. Hi. Hi. No. Sorry, so you were supposed to be speaking. I'm sorry. I'm sure it is. I'll put a note on here. Yeah, of course it can. Yeah. Yeah, no, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. What's your name? Usun.